Hey there folks, so welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Angaleena Presley called Wrangled. So as I've said a number of times recently, country is at a bit of a crossroads moment right now, between the generally inoffensive and occasionally decent pop country, the neo-traditional and Texas tones that are picking up market share, the insurgent indie scene that can sound like so many different things, and of course whatever stale garbage that Nashville's churning out to try and recapture a bro country audience that has mostly stopped listening. The mainstream could tilt in many different directions, and there hasn't really been a lot of clarity where the chips will ultimately fall. But in the aftermath of bro country's collapse, there is something that needs to be addressed, and it's not good. If you're looking for women on mainstream country radio, you're gonna be left out in the cold. It's not saying that there aren't a few mainstream success stories. Kelsey Ballerini, Lauren Elena, and Maren Morris, they're playing to the pop crowd. Carrie Underwood and Miranda Lambert, they're continuing to mostly chalk up hits as veterans, although Miranda Lambert's not doing great. But especially when you look at the indie crossovers, I'm a little bit perplexed why we haven't seen that woman who can stand up with Chris Stapleton or Jason Isbell or Sturgill Simpson. Because these indie acts, they definitely exist. Hell, I've covered a fair few of them on this show in recent years, along with the artists that have a mainstream accessible sound and who could easily have radio presence. So take, say, Angaleena Presley, a member of the Pistol Annies along with Miranda Lambert and Ashley Monroe. With her 2014 solo debut album, American Middle Class, she won over the critics in droves. And I dearly wish that I had covered it 3 years ago, because of all the Pistol Annies, while Miranda Lambert sanded back some of her edge for the mainstream, and Ashley Monroe mostly played to some sort of restraint, Angaleena Presley, she didn't have any compunctions embracing her inner Hellraiser. Her production more ramshackle and grimy and rough to match out the writing that didn't mince words in its cutting approach to small-town Americana. Casey Musgrave, she might get kinda cute about it, and Brandy Clark and Laurie McKenna might showcase some complicated melancholy around all of it, but there was an intelligent fury and venom from Angaleena Presley that was willing to get pretty nasty. And let's get real. Despite good connections, conservative country radio tends to get very skittish with this sort of content, especially considering Presley never played as broad or theatrical or accessible as Miranda Lambert or Carrie Underwood in her delivery or writing. And yet, fast forward to 2017, with the indie doors broken wide open these days for mainstream crossover, I gotta admit, I was a little bit surprised that her second album, Wrangled, wasn't inspiring more conversation beyond just the indie critical set, where it was gonna get conversation anyway, especially if it is at all comparable in quality to American Middle Class, because that album was really damn great. So, despite being, again, late to the punch, I managed to dig in. What'd I find with this? Well, I found a pretty damn solid country record that on some level feels like the natural continuation of American Middle Class, except this time around with a tighter personal focus as Angaleena Presley lashes out at a country music industry that pushed her away for all of the wrong reasons, and then coming to grips with that disappointment as she stares out at what possibilities could potentially lay ahead of her in the indie scene. So while this is not really better than American Middle Class, that record tapped into the sort of intensity and songwriting clout that's kind of hard to replicate, but you can definitely tell that Wrangled is coming from a more deeply held personal place, while being a pretty damn great record in its own right. I'm really upset I did not get this due sooner. So to understand what actually happened here and really set the stage, we're gonna start off with the lyrics and themes. Now, Angaleena Presley has described this record as her fuck you album, so of course there's gonna be a level of bitterness that rings through here. But the emotional portrait here is of course more complicated. There's always been a certain sexually brazen quality to Angaleena Presley's image in comparison with the other Pistol Annies. One, of course, she embraced to some great effect, and still shows up on this project, but if anything, it only heightens the sting of disappointment and the lingering feelings of failure at having to readjust her expectations. The song that has attracted the most attention here is Country, a noisy and disheveled collaboration with Yelawolf of all people, where she just mercilessly highlights the emptiness of modern bro country list anthems. And well, I think the instrumentation is a bit of a pile-up, and Yelawolf's verse might pander a little bit too much to that indie country crowd that loves Sturgill Simpson and Shooter Jennings. Having lived through bro country, she's not exactly wrong with her commentary and parody here, but that's only focusing on the anger. What lies beneath it is a sense of real, wistful longing and pain, as you can tell that she was trying to chase dreams of being a star and to be herself at the same time, only to see the country music throw her out to embrace a cleaner, more accessible, more conservative ideal. One that from the sounds of Bless My Heart, she has as much contempt for its plastic as I do. And that's the thing. If you can listen to Outlaw, you can tell that she never wanted to be pushed out for making this sort of rough-edged music. She never wanted to be the villain in her story. And when she has to go to her mother on Mama I Tried to explain why the success just isn't coming, that's kinda hard. It certainly makes the Yellow Wolf collaboration make a certain amount of sense, as he has also not been afraid to highlight how audiences haven't exactly entirely embraced his work on songs like Heartbreak, and it's clear that Presley is at least aware that for as much as she chafes against society and religious strictures, on the title track, the man in her life does so as well, working himself raw trying to provide for her when he just can't. It's not just her that feels tied down in this case, and to some extent she knows it. And so, she adjusts to the smaller, harder indie scene, and by the end of the record finds a vestige of peace and knowing that there's going to be some groundswell to support her, and you know what? I can respect that. But all that being said, for as much as I agree that Angelena Presley should never have to change to fit country's incredibly stiff mold, especially when men are afforded so much more room to experiment that they rarely ever take, I have to wonder if a little bit more self-awareness might have tempered some of her expectations going in, because it's not like she writes fluffy or easy to digest material. I mean, the second song on the album, High School, tackles teen pregnancy and a football quarterback taking pain pills to keep up with parental pressure. And Only Blood has the main character marry a pastor, get abused by that pastor, and then gun him down. Because after all, only blood can set you free. I mean, that's a Nick Cave-esque murder ballad, and yeah, it is awesome, but there's a part of me that isn't exactly surprised that mainstream conservative country radio might not have known what to do with it, or even bro country radio, or with the rest of her last album in that same boat, especially when you consider that Presley is twisting the moralistic framing of the song to some weird knots, which is a far cry from the power fantasies of Carrie Underwood's murder ballads. Presley's music does feel a little bit more visceral and real and raw, especially courtesy of her more restrained and subtle delivery. But you know what? That can be a double-edged sword in her own right, reminding me most of Cheryl Desiree in a far rougher, more desperate scene. Not so much conventionally expressive, but given how she's had to knuckle back her rage and find her own lane, that does make a certain amount of sense, but that can be kind of intimidating for a mainstream audience. But what makes a little bit less sense here is when you consider the production and instrumentation, which is playing to very much the same aggressive, bare-bones, live tones that colored a lot of American middle class, or maybe a Hank Williams III record. Hell, if anything, cranking up the reverb and delay on both the vocal and guitar pickups makes these songs feel even more smoky and dark, especially on the interlude of Dreams Don't Come True with the Pistol Annies, or the dank, swampy tones of Only Blood, or the more discordant, charging riffs on Country. And while I'm definitely going to give credit to the more striking bass lines that ran through Mama I Tried, or the more traditional grooves running through the final few songs that do have some bite to them, I'm left feeling that this record might have overdone it a little bit with some of the production, particularly in the reverb and the squonking, buzzy guitar tones. I mean, I've heard garage rock and blues rock with less bite than some of these songs, much less mainstream country, and I'm not sure I could recall any point in history where the radio would play something with this much of an edge behind it, especially from a female artist. Terrible to say, but it's true. Again, I'm not saying that I would object to hearing any of this on the radio, or that Angelena Presley's approach to the more acoustic-leaning title track, or Outlaw, or the banjo and electric guitar that anchors Groundswell, they could conceivably slot in well with their warmer blend of tones from the steel and electric guitars. But you know, I don't even think that Eric Church or Chris Stapleton could have broken some of these songs to the radio. And again, that's not saying that there shouldn't be a place for this stuff against the overly sanitized pop country, or the meat-headed clunkers that Nashville keeps shoveling out and just suck. In my opinion, there should be room for all of it. But if one of your main emotional anchor points of the album is rejection by the establishment, I think a little bit of self-awareness about the overall sound of her collective body of work might have kind of helped, especially considering that Presley's subtler brand of writing and delivery is unlikely to trigger a sea change as much as I would welcome it. She's not going to change mainstream country radio, especially with this sort of sound and presentation. But as a whole, I really did like Wrangled, and while I don't quite think the writing and production is quite as sharp or as detailed as her debut, this is a damn fine follow-up. I like this. I like the rougher tones, the arc of the album is well defined, and contains plenty of nuance in between the lines, and while it might have taken me a little bit of time to really come around to it, I did come around on Angelena Presley's delivery. It did take a while. It is kind of subtle. For me, light 8 out of 10, definitely a recommendation. Yes, I know, I got to this one entirely too late, but if you get a chance to hear it, check it out. Definitely worth your time. It's pretty kick-ass. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. This is a bit of a late review, I know. I really wanted to get to it though. It's got some firepower to it, a lot to like. So if you guys want to buy the record, and I highly recommend you do, links in the description below, and I've got the poll up there, so any of you guys who actually have heard it, I'm curious what you think about this, especially with respect to her debut. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get a little bit more involved in my schedule, which is getting increasingly overloaded, link to that right over here into my Patreon, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week you guys get to add records or even movies to my schedule if you're in the higher tiers. More details right there, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.